Hollywood's most famous movie stars leave the film capital to help the government sell war bonds. Irene Dunn, Ronald Colman, Hedy Lamarr, Greer Garson, all part of a contingent of some 50 screen celebrities giving their time and talents to aid the national war effort.
Arriving in Washington after a cross-country tour of more than 300 cities, they paraded down Pennsylvania Avenue to a bond rally on the Treasury steps. Hollywood went to war in other ways, too. Some movie stars enlisted. Tyrone Power joined the Marines, Doug Fairbanks the Navy, and Clark Gable, at age 41, enlisted in the Army Air Force, joining Jimmy Stewart. During the war, Hollywood produced hundreds of movies glorifying the Allied cause, as well as shorts for the government that kept us fighting on the home front.
How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? We've stopped production on Hollywood Canteen to give me a moment to bring you an urgent wartime message from your government. It's simply this. Our boys on the fighting fronts are worried. They want to know that you'll stay on the job with them until final victory is won. So don't quit your war job. You see, they won't quit when the news is good. They won't quit until they've won. And they want you with them, getting that last plane, last tank, last gun for final and complete victory. So let's stay on the war job and finish the war job.
World War II would be a fight to maintain the very liberties and freedoms our founding fathers fought to establish. Everything the Nazi Party and the fascists in Italy, Germany, and Japan stood for, America would stand against, at least on paper. In reality, the U.S. would respond to Nazi and Japanese aggression in much the same manner with which the Axis instigated the conflict. As World War II unfolded in the early to mid-1940s, the U.S. would engage in direct attacks upon German and Japanese civilians in an attempt to break those nations' fighting spirit and ability to produce war material, just as Japan and Germany had attacked civilian populations. While Germany and Japan's deliberate bureaucratic and institutionalized policies of racial purity were unparalleled in destruction and loss of life, the United States' own policies of institutionalized racism enabled nearly all of its Japanese citizens to be unlawfully imprisoned for over 3 years. The segregation that separated and oppressed blacks in the South extended even to the armed forces, where there were very few black officers. Blacks most disproportionately held the most demeaning jobs, as they tended to fill positions in mortuaries and cleaning up battlefields. And even wounded African Americans could not get blood transfusions from white donors. Indeed, the racial iniquity evident in America's armed forces during a global war against Nazi racism would be an important factor in the fight for equal civil rights that would directly follow in the 1950s. Now, some have argued that the Great Depression itself was also a key reason the United States joined the Second World War. There is a lot of superficial evidence to corroborate this potential motivation. Once the United States enacted its draft in 1940 and the Lend-Lease Act in 1941, unemployment in our country plummeted to record lows. With more and more production and greater government spending, one could easily argue that the United States' involvement in World War II ended the Great Depression, and you would be correct. Officially, the Depression ended on December 8, 1941, the very day our nation officially became involved in fighting the Second World War. It would, however, be a grave mistake to assume that entering World War II was a calculated move simply to end the Depression itself. It wasn't the war that ended our Depression, it was the spending our country or government engaged in that ended the Depression. Because the federal government opened the national treasury up to spur on the production of our nation's factories in order to build to fight World War II, America rapidly pulled out of its economic slump. The federal government spent far more money on 3.5 years of World War than it had invested in over 8 years of New Deal programs. The question one should ask is, why didn't the government spend so extravagantly during the Depression? The only logical answer to this question is that Americans and their president and their Congress lacked the will to spend so enormously without something as immediate and as threatening as a war to spark that fire. It's almost a cliche to hear that war is good for the economy, but nothing could be further from the truth. War is tremendously expensive, and the production for war is almost entirely focused upon material for fighting the war, whereas peacetime production is far more diversely based upon consumer products. While our gross domestic product did improve during World War II, its growth was dwarfed by the economic boom of the 1950s. Ask anybody who had to ration their butter, their meat, their milk, or their fruits or vegetables during World War II just how good a time it was for consumers, and you'll get a clear answer. Further, war produces two things in abundance no matter whose side you're on: death and destruction. Dead men, or women for that matter, cannot work in factories or buy goods or services. Destroyed equipment can never be used again. The heretofore unmatched death and destruction wrought by World War II, nearly 60 million military and civilian dead, along with tens of trillions of dollars of property destruction, would create immediate economic hardship, not growth, after the Second World War ended. Europe and Japan would virtually need to be built from the ground up. War is far more costly than peace. Just as I argued in my lecture on the Civil War, had the United States chosen to engage its spending abilities during the Depression, as it engaged them during the Second World War, a very different history after 1940 would have had to have been written. The United States is learning this lesson again in its current military imbroglios in both Iraq and Afghanistan, as spending in both of these conflicts has exceeded what we spent on World War I and Vietnam, and is rapidly approaching what we spent on World War II. Americans are learning again that when massive amounts of government monies are engaged in fighting wars abroad, these monies cannot be spent fighting wars against economic desperation at home. President Obama, at least on the surface, seems to be making choices that hail back to the policies of Richard Nixon. Using diplomacy, conversation, and compromise to reach international agreements that promote peaceful resolution and de-escalation of tensions, as opposed to investing billions, trillions to fight them out. Whether or not President Obama will follow through with his pledges to change how we relate to places like Cuba, Iran, and even North Korea has yet to be seen, and quite frankly, is one of the many reasons that make our present situation exciting. What will happen next? Will we need World War III to lift us out of this depression? Hopefully not. Stay tuned to the world around you to find out.